Professor X as Juggernaut. In What If number 13, the question is posed, what if Professor X had become the Juggernaut? And the answer is, it would make Ben Ball feel uncomfortable. This mashup is maybe a little tough to justify for this list since it's about superheroes, and in this story Professor X, or not, does enlist all of the mutants to take over the world, but it's still Professor X in there somewhere, and it's arguable that he may have been turned from good to evil by the influence of the Sidorak gem. I just had to put this strange character on the list because I think it's such a weird combination to even consider, let alone craft a whole issue around. Look at him. Chonky, fully mobile Professor X. When he puts the helmet on, things are less weird though, but it's still one for the list.
Number 9. Wolverwimp. Wolverwimp is an alternate version of Wolverine who, instead of having an adamantium skeleton, has a styrofoam one. He appears in one of the joke covers included in issue 100 of What If. This poor version of Wolverine is threatened by a little girl who is a female child version of Magneto. Yeah, it's weird. While Wolverine is fearsome and tends to fight for what he believes in no matter the odds, it seems that Wolverwimp is all too ready to shy away from a fight as he's terrified of a conflict. Honestly, I really can't blame the poor guy. He is a styrofoam skeleton, so yeah. I don't even know how you'd walk around with that, never mind trying to be a hero and like stand up to bad guys. Probably just like crumple over.
Frog Thor, or Throg. There's not much more to it than that. The question posed in this issue is, what if the X-Men had stayed in Asgard? It really has nothing to do with Frog Thor, but he makes an epic appearance nonetheless. The transformation actually takes place in Thor number 363 and is revisited in this What If issue. If you don't already know, or couldn't already have guessed, Thor's slimy amphibian form comes at the hands of his brother Loki. What makes this moment great in What If number 12 though is that Storm is forced to face off against Frog Thor, with the stakes being the prosperity of all of Asgard. Luckily, she wins the fight and Frog Thor is turned back into regular Thor. Although, is that really a win? I liked Frog Thor. If you want to see more of Throg, you can catch him in another storyline as well, where a shard of Thor's hammer is actually picked up by a frog, turning it into a pretty powerful little dude. I just thought that was worth mentioning as well. Frog Thor.
Number 7. Joshua Guthrie and Unit Jim 211131. This is actually a pretty sad story, but one that is also kind of silly. It's basically reminiscent of the Iron Giant. Remember the Iron Giant? Remember all the tears that we cried? Except instead of any old giant robot, we have a Sentinel. Unit Jim 211131. This Sentinel is found by Josh Guthrie, little sibling to Husk and Cannonball, who never has his mutant powers manifest. In this world anyways. On our 616, Josh ends up getting wings and musical mutant abilities, going by the codename Icarus. Here, however, he just gets a Sentinel, who has broken programming and instead believes his prime directive is basically to protect and serve Josh. However, he still remembers that mutants are a threat, and when he meets Paige and Sam Guthrie, ends up battling against them, while painted up like an X-Men. Josh's idea, because he wanted to prove that he and his robot were basically a better team than the X-Men ever could be. Oh boy. Paige and Sam end up beaten by the Sentinel, but just as it's about to terminate the defeated mutants, oh no! Josh steps in to protect his siblings. He says that the Sentinel can't kill them without killing him as well. As such, the robot realizes it is the main threat to Josh and decides to terminate itself instead in order to protect him, because that's its prime directive at this point. Sure, Sentinels are kind of villains, but in this story, in a roundabout way, Unit Jim 211131 is actually kind of the hero. Although he threatens Paige and Sam and Josh, he also ends up saving them from himself. I don't know why I made the Sentinel a he, but the Sentinel's a he now, because I'm not going to go back. I gave the Sentinel a gender, I hope that's okay. Josh mourns the loss of his robo friend, and it is ultra sad. Just like Iron Giant.
Thanos Captain America. In What If Infinity Thanos, the question is posed, what if Thanos joined the Avengers? And the result is this really strange depiction of Thanos wearing a Captain America suit. What goes on in this storyline is that Thanos joins up with the Avengers to fight the Builders, and he doesn't even try to take over the world, or try and kill half the population, or anything like that. That is until Captain America is killed and Thanos takes over for him. Because then he decides it's time to start taking over stuff again. After he helps the Avengers destroy the Builders with a swift battle, he goes back to his classic Thanos self and makes it his duty to take on Cap's old position as leader. And then quickly makes it his duty as well to lead the Avengers and the rest of the heroes of Earth into war with the rest of the universe. So yeah, he doesn't take over Earth, but he seems to be ready to help them take over other worlds alongside him. Fair compromise? I guess so. Either way, the cover of this issue just feels so weird, and I felt that Captain America Thanos needed to make an appearance on this list.
Number 5. Actual Black Widow. Black Widow in issue 34 of What If gets her own little mini comic taking up a third of a page. It's really kind of like just a panel. It answers the question, what if Spider-Man had married the Black Widow? Well, it wouldn't end well apparently. The joke is based on what Black Widows are known to do to their mates in nature. Female Black Widows, that is. In nature, they eat their mates, hence why in this comic Spider-Man doesn't fare too well. The implication is that Black Widow actually eats Peter here. We see her picking her teeth, looking quite content and burping, while behind her Spider-Man's suit looks pretty deflated with bones poking out of it and littered around it. So yeah.
You! Yes, you. In this issue of What If, the question is posed, what if you were Spider-Man? They start with a panel of Spider-Man swinging Mary Jane to safety, and they even encourage you to paste a picture of your own face over Spider-Man's to make it even more immersive. But moving forward, this issue doesn't really take much time to explore that question before absolutely roasting you beyond words. The very next panel shows a big group of all of Spider-Man's villains standing in a graveyard, pointing and laughing at a gravestone that reads, "Here lies, fill in your name here," and in big bold letters says, "You'd be dead, you're no superhero." So mean, but also very funny. I thought this was a great one to include because as much as Marvel is known for their meta commentary, this is just on a whole different level.
Number 3. Galen. Galactus may be better known as a villain in the Marvel Universe, the main Marvel Universe, or at least a powerful antagonist if you will, but in the What If reality of Earth 92201, he's actually better known for being a sort of everyday hero, if you will. When Galen as Galactus ends up in battle against Thanos, who wields the Infinity Gauntlet, he ends up defeated, being transformed into an amnesiac human left on planet Earth. When found, it just so happens that Galen's voice and appearance greatly resembled that of a young Elvis. People believed he was Elvis returned, positing that Elvis never really died. Galen even ends up believing he is Elvis and finds happiness on Earth with a woman named Gertrude and her son Tony. Warlock finds Galen and offers to turn him back into his form of Galactus, but Galen is actually so happy he chooses to remain on Earth and continue living as Earth's Elvis replacement, basically. It's a great story.
Stan Lee and the original Marvel bullpen as the Fantastic Four. Naturally, this issue poses the question, what if the original Marvel bullpen had become the Fantastic Four? And what we see is a version of Mr. Fantastic with the likeness of Stan Lee, which is just so fun and bizarre. Jack Kirby, Flo Steinberg, and Saul Brodsky also appear as the other three, and they have themselves a fun, very original adventure as the popular titular heroes. Unfortunately, this issue apparently has some pretty sexist overtones, mostly aimed at Steinberg, which makes the Marvel creators come off as sort of unlikable, especially by today's standards. But regardless, it's a lot of fun to see the people behind the scenes of many of our favorite comics in the forefront of this unique issue of What If.
Number 1. Sheep Boy. When it comes to characters that really stick out to me in the world of Marvel What If, I gotta say a lot of them come from the funny little bits of the comics that aren't even full issues. Because come on, they're so wonderfully ridiculous. One such example at one such point, I guess, is the notorious Sheep Boy. Sheep Boy made his first appearance in What If issue 100. He was created by Jim Chung and is the reimagined version of Spider-Man. Basically, what if Peter Parker had been bit by a radioactive sheep instead? What would we get? Sheep Boy, which would really make for an interesting clone saga when it comes to figuring out the cloning process. Because, aren't we all about sheeps when it comes to cloning? Actually, I think that through cloning sheep we actually learned that cloning humans would be ill-advised. So maybe there'd be no more clones in the Marvel Universe if it started with sheep. No more clone sagas after that. I don't know if that would be good or bad. Depends on how much you like or dislike clones, I guess.
At number 10, we have Benjamin Grimm with dragon wings. In What If number 6, the question is posed, what if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers? And the answer is that things get very weird. Basically, instead of taking the form of the Thing, Benjamin Grimm's powers are reduced, or ameliorated, I guess, to basically just 2 giant dragon wings on his back. He decides that he wants to be known by citizens as Dragonfly, which just proves that as long as you've got powers, people are gonna celebrate you no matter what. Someone even feels his wing and says, "Hey, I'm touching his wing," and it's kind of cold, which is bizarre to me because it adds that little extra bit of detail that I don't think I needed while reading this one. The other heroes get their own makeovers as well, and I'm covering another one later on in this list, but just seeing a shirtless Ben Grimm flying around with purple scaly wings made me think, well, I just needed to put him on the list. At number 9, we have Medieval Iron Man. In this what if, the question is asked, what if Iron Man was trapped in the time of King Arthur? So, Iron Man is basically the same as he's always been, except what I find super weird in this issue is that he so brutally outmatches everyone in the medieval era, but doesn't hold back at all. I mean, just on the cover, you see him blasting his futuristic energy blast into a crowd of helpless soldiers as they're screaming for their lives. I don't know what gets into Iron Man in this issue that makes him think that he's in any moral position to be dropping into the medieval times and dominating the combat game, but that's just how this one plays out, and honestly, it's great. It's a weird portrayal of Iron Man given the context of the story, but it's honestly a pretty cool what if that I recommend checking out. At number 8 is the Watcher as a stand-up comedian. I know he's not really a superhero, but I'd argue that he's more good than bad, and he's surely got powers, so he's on the list. In this one, the Watcher asks a bunch of different what if questions, one being, haven't you always wondered what would happen if the Watcher was a stand-up comedian? Not really, but okay, let's see what he's got. Basically, this issue delves into some pretty bizarre artwork and poses a bunch of different questions in a row. I suppose these are the comedic premises that the Watcher is throwing at us as a stand-up comedian. Such riveting humor as, what if the Hulk were yellow? And what if the Thing were blue? And who could forget, what if the Invisible Girl dyed her hair? Okay, that one's pretty funny. But this one just struck me as very bizarre. Although I think that was the goal of this issue and probably all of the what if issues, so mission accomplished, I guess. At number 7, we have Magneto. This is a very niche one, and I'll give you $1 if you can pause the video now and guess where this character makes her first and only appearance. Okay, Magneto is a mean little girl with a Venom shirt, and she appears on a gag splash page in What If issue number 100. Called Wolverwimp. Wolverwimp was covered in the first part of this video on the channel. It's basically Wolverine with styrofoam bones. But on the cover right next to him, we're not quite sure who Magneto is or what she symbolizes, but it's suggested that she may have some powers of her own, possibly similar to those of the popular anti-hero Magneto. Even though she's mean, it's arguable that she'd be considered a superhero if her story was given some more airtime. If she was meant to be the Magneto of this hypothetical storyline, we just hope she would take on the hero status that Magneto currently flaunts. I don't know. Comment below what you think Magneto's powers would be if she was given a proper issue. At number 6 is Rockstar Black Bolt. In this what if issue, a bunch of different questions are asked in the same comic, and each one gets a short exploration of what would happen. In the case of Black Bolt becoming a rock star, his voice would naturally dismantle the structure of the arena he was singing at, and probably beyond. Along with his band, the Inhumans, this image is just so weird to picture for some reason. Not the crumbling environment, but just the image of Black Bolt screaming his soul out into the microphone, singing none other than a Rolling Stones song. I suppose all these what ifs are gonna give us weird new perspectives of the characters we know doing things they don't normally do, but for some reason this one just gave me a weird vibe. Maybe it's that one panel where he's screaming into the mic with his tongue out. At number 5, we have Dr. Doom / The Thing. This one falls in the category of weird, but also pretty badass, at least in how he looks. And maybe arguable on whether or not he's a hero in this case, because it is Dr. Doom that turns into the Thing, not the other way around. But let's just call this character a direct mix between the Thing and Dr. Doom for the purposes of this list, which would make him good enough. Basically, in this what if, Ben Grimm is turned into the Hulk, and Dr. Doom is instead the one who's turned into the Thing. There's a lot going on in this story, as you can imagine, but for a brief period we get to see the rocky figure of the Thing decked out in Doctor Doom's green hood. And when he inevitably faces off against the Ben Grimm Hulk, he does get taken down a notch after a rough defeat. But it was a pretty weird combo while it lasted. Cool, but weird. But also cool, but weird. Definitely weird. At number 4 is Storm Thor. This character comes to be in the what if that poses the question, what if the X-Men had stayed in Asgard? And the answer is that Storm is somehow able to lift Mjolnir and become Thor. There have been other heroes before that have wielded Mjolnir, like Beta Ray Bill, Captain America, and even Superman. But in this case, Storm becomes the goddess of thunder. And it's just a weird image to see her in the cape and shoulder armor. But it gets even weirder when she's tasked with clashing against a version of Thor that was turned into a frog, or the other way around, I can't really remember. If you saw the first part of this video, I covered Frog Thor already, but I figured we needed to talk about Storm Thor as well. It's fair to say that this was a weird what if issue. It's made it into both parts of this list. At number 3 we have 1000 Hulks. This obviously isn't one individual weird hero, but an event that spawns 1000 of the same character and creates a very weird army of nameless versions of the Hulk. So, what if? What would happen? Well, if you couldn't already have guessed, the answer is insanity. Basically, the title is What If the Gamma Bomb Spawned 1000 Hulks? But it's not quite what actually takes place in the story. The story explores the tragic events of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs and theorizes if instead of decimating whole populations, they actually spawned 1000 Japanese Hulks. It's a weird theory to ponder. I feel like they could have kept it out of a tragic historical context and still gotten the point across, but nonetheless, 1000 Hulks is a very strange and fun what if. Spoiler, they take over America, which you can imagine is totally possible if there were 1000 Hulks, and I'm sure they could do it in like a day. There'd be zero stability when they finally got control. At number 2 we have Reed Richards as a bodiless brain. This character shows up in the what if that asks, what if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers? Yes, it's the same one that I covered earlier that had Ben Grimm sporting dragon wings. Only in Mr. Fantastic's case, he's reduced to a tiny little fleshy brain just laying on the ground. But he can talk and everything still, just telekinetically. He also seems to have mind control capabilities. What's hilarious about this version of Reed Richards is that he seems super optimistic about the whole thing. Like, he's completely vulnerable and helpless, but all in all, he's totally looking forward to life as a brain, or as Big Brain, which seems to be his new moniker. It's sort of obvious from the jump that his change into a brain is sort of a nod to Reed Richards' famed intellect as one of the greatest minds in the world. But I guess they wanted to see what he could accomplish with just the mind part and nothing else. Good thing he's got his Fantastic Four buddies to carry him around, because otherwise he'd still be sitting on that rock waiting for someone's mind to control. At number 1 we have Aunt May Spider-Woman. This one is self-explanatory really. The question is posed, what if Aunt May was the one bitten by the radioactive spider? It's at the end of issue number 23 volume 1, check it out if you have time. Basically, she comes home and the spider's on the door frame. It bites her, and the next thing we know, Aunt May is crawling up the side of a building. Then she promptly sews her own costume together and starts fighting a frog-like villain with springs on his feet. What makes this character even goofier is that as all this is happening, she forgets that she'd been in the middle of baking bread and the dough has expanded beyond what was expected. Like way beyond. It pretty much fills her whole entire kitchen. She then takes the dough and uses it to her advantage as she summons it in battle to soften a big free fall, and then even turns it into a whip and hooks the frog dude's ankle. She literally uses the dough to like swing the frog guy into a tree and deliver the final blow. It's definitely one of the silliest moments in any Marvel comic book I've read thus far, and I'm just surprised it didn't make it into the part 1 of this video.
Number 10. Ice Giant Thor. A perfect what if tale. It's almost surprising it wasn't done before this point. In What If Thor in 2018, we get the story of what if Thor was raised by frost giants. Laufey, the king of the frost giants, defeats Odin in their battle so long ago. And just as Odin took the infant Loki, Laufey takes the kid Thor and raises him as his own. Loki is obviously here too, and like usual, they form a pretty tight bond as adopted brothers. Unfortunately, Unfortunately, due to Thor's strength and skill in battle, not to mention his fondness for summoning the power of lightning, he is praised among the Frost Giants and by Laufey himself, who begins to completely forget Loki, his actual true son. Instead, Loki finds the captured Freya in the dungeons and she teaches him how to use magic. Loki eventually busts her out of prison and together they attempt to escape to Midgard. They go to the ruins of Asgard and attempt to repair the Rainbow Bridge until Thor and Laufey show up. Loki ends the life of his father while Thor unknowingly ends his mother with a blast from his giant ice hammer, Ice Crusher. Thor almost takes out his brother as well, but at the last minute, he lets him go. We don't know what happens next, only that Loki went to Midgard, had kids and a family, and apparently became a hero. It ends on a rather sweet note though. Number 9. Man-Spider. Okay, so in this story, everything that happens to Spider-Man is exactly the same. Oh, sorry, I left out the extremely important detail that in What If number 8 in 1978, this isn't Peter Parker, it's Webster Weaver, an anthropomorphized spider in a world of other animal people. Oh yes, and he gets bit by a radioactive human, giving this spider the proportional powers of a human. Apart from that, and the villains being hilarious alternate versions like Marvin the Hunter, Culture Vulture, Rude Rhino, the Green Gobbler, King Pig, Octodoctopus, and Leaping Lizard, everything is just the same as it always is. Until one day, Ray's the Bug Spray Baron threatened to destroy the ozone unless he was given $1 trillion. Turns out Ray's is the guy who defeated Webster's Uncle Ben. Uncle Bug. Man-Spider saves the day, Ray's is destroyed, and he swings back home to Aunt Mayfly. Okay, yes, it's totally different, but a lot of story beats are still the same, so there's that. Number 8. Mustang. What If 114 posed us the question, what if heroes didn't leave the battle world? The answer? They make babies! While there are a few super kids in this story, the one I found to be the strangest was Mustang. Mustang is Clint Barton Jr., and I bet you'll never guess who his father is. His mother, on the other hand, again, not surprising if you just look at him, is Jennifer Walters, the She-Hulk. So, with these two avenging parents, that leaves Mustang with a super strength that isn't quite on She-Hulk's level, and an affinity for using bows. I'm sorry, it's just an odd combo to me. He's a bit taller than almost everyone else too, which makes sense. So I'm guessing this gives him the ability to use bigger bows with much higher tensile strength? So he can shoot bigger arrows? He can fire them much faster? Look, I'm not saying these powers aren't helpful or cool. Super strength is a classic. They're just odd when they're put together. Also, why Mustang? Number 7. Wolverine, Lord of the Vampires. What If Volume 2, number 24 takes the story of Uncanny X-Men number 159, in which Dracula has drunk just enough from Storm to gain control of her mind. But instead, in What If, he drinks enough to completely turn her into a member of the undead. As an evil, unstoppable vampire, Storm turns all the other X-Men into vampires as well. But thanks to Wolverine's healing factor and berserker powers, he is able to resist the complete mind control of Dracula and beheads the Vampire King. Now, after either turning or delifing almost all the other heroes and having the US turned into a quarantine zone, the only hero left to stop Wolverine, Vampire Lord, has found his perfect vessel after traveling the astral plane. Doctor Strange's spirit and Frank Castle, the Punisher, sort of merged together, and being the most accomplished vampire hunter, Frank dispatches quite a few vamps before Kitty Pryde attempts to split the two before being separated from her head. This, of all things, snaps Wolverine out of it, and he gets to the Darkhold and destroys himself and every single other vampire. Wow, what a roller coaster of emotion. Number 6. Fantastic Four as cosmonauts. Let's explore the what if story that begs the question of what if the Fantastic Four were Russian? Well, for starters, their name is different. In fact, they're pretty much all different. Now, the UFFF, or the Ultimate Federalist Freedom Fighters, the team is made up of Rudian Richards, the commie Red Richards, who instead of stretching can just pop off his limbs and send them out over long distances, which is way more alarming. Natalia Romanova, the 616 Black Widow, who is now Widowmaker and can control electromagnetic energy. Pyotr Rasputin, who is still just Colossus and has all those powers, except his body and mind are deteriorating over time. And lastly, Piotr's sister Ilyana Rasputina, who seems to have the powers of Sue Storm, but we only ever see her go invisible, which is way less cool than the 616 continuity. After the demise of Stalin, the team is put under KGB control, and Rudd Richards, easily the strangest member of the team, is not having it, especially after he accidentally ends the life of Giant Man. Widowmaker makes widows of the wives of the leaders of the KGB, and the superhero teams go on to fight for freedom and equality. But that isn't how you thought it would go. I didn't. Number 5. Daredevil is bullied and just gives up. One day, when fighting against Electro with Spider-Man, Daredevil is unaffected by a blinding flare set off right in front of his face by Electro. This kinda clues in Electro to the idea that maybe this Daredevil guy is already blind. And when Electro and Spider-Man ask Daredevil what color Electro's costume is, it seals the deal. Electro lets the whole world know by leaking this info to the Daily Bugle after Spider-Man actually sort of makes fun of him, saying it makes sense why he chose that yellow costume, because he couldn't see how bad it was, you know? Villains begin to take advantage of the massive weakness for Daredevil, and while he is able to hold his own still, he eventually decides to undergo an experimental treatment that restores his sight but removes his super senses. Now powerless, Matt Murdock and Karen Page get married and have a normal life, with Matt becoming the district attorney. Wow, kind of a nice ending there. Number 4, Limo Man. In one of those many crazy panels in number 34 of What If, remember that one where the Watcher is a comedian? We get to see a single panel that asks the question, what if Tony Stark owned an auto company instead of a weapons company? Now, whoever was writing this panel was absolutely cooking with gas. They knew what was up. Basically, if that was the case, then the world would get to interact with Limo Man, a hero with a license plate, belt, tire pauldrons, with rear view mirror horns, headlights on his chest, and a sweet pair of rollerblades. He is honestly the least cool Transformer you have ever seen. He does look like he's made up of a luxury car though, so I guess that gives him some kind of arbitrary style points. Right? At least the robber he seems to be facing seems to be a little bit worried. Number 3, 6-armed Spider-Man. In the legit continuity, Spider-Man undergoes an experiment to try and get rid of his spider abilities. Instead, he gains 2 extra sets of arms. Great success! In the original universe, he uses a serum with the blood of the living vampire Morbius to revert back to his normal self. But in What If number 42, Morbius is eaten by sharks, because of course he is. And Spider-Man is doomed to retain his 8 limbs. Ultimately, this Spider-Man learns that maybe these limbs are not a curse, but actually give him a buff in his agility and attack power. He is even able to save Gwen Stacy from her demise. Looks like someone rolled a natural 20. He was so popular that he went on to actually go on to be included in a few multiversal Spider events. So honestly, a great, if not weird, version of Spider-Man. Number 2, Dazzler, Herald of Galactus. Dazzler is already weird without being in a What If story. She's a collab between Marvel and a record label. That's all I have to say. Okay, so Dazzler's power is that she can convert sound into light. Pretty good for a disco singer. And especially so since she uses this power to literally dazzle people at her concerts. In What If number 33 though, Dazzler is chosen as the new Herald of Galactus, being the only being who could retrieve the old Herald who hid in a black hole, which she does. And then, in the alternate timeline, Galactus sends him back into the black hole as a punishment? I don't know, okay? She was given a huge boost with the power cosmic, and for some reason, even with her new boosted up powers, she decides to keep the disco ball rollerblades. She's actually really torn up about having to leave her world, but she vows to at least do good by not letting Galactus eat inhabited planets, which Galactus actually obliges because, well, it seems like he's got the hots for Dazzler, or whatever the world-eating equivalent of the hots is. There is a whole conflict with an armada, and then Galactus releases her to go back to Earth, which has been the victim of an apocalypse in her absence. And she goes back to him yet again as some kind of weird, twisted, intergalactic love story. I don't know, it's really strange. Number 1, Jane Foster becomes Thor. But Adam, this happens in the 616 continuity. Yes, but this one's a little bit different. In this what if story, number 10 actually, it is Jane Foster who first picks up the hammer Mjolnir, not Donald Blake. In this story, Jane accompanies Dr. Blake on his trip to Norway, and when he drops his cane into a ravine, she goes down there to get it for him instead. Striking the stick, she becomes Thordis. Yes, Thordis. Unlike the modern interpretation, a female wielding Mjolnir gets an entirely new name. Wielding the power of Thor, Thordis fights off the Saturn rock people, and then turns the cane that she seems to have stolen from Donald Blake, leaving him helpless without a cane, into a hairbrush to better fit in with her feminine alter ego, because men don't use hairbrushes apparently. She has pretty much the same adventures as Thor. She's rejected by Odin, and Sif gets with Donald Blake, until the events of Ragnarok when Odin decides to give the hammer back to Blake because he can't accept Jane as Thor. And then, as thanks, he turns Jane into a different god and then marries her? Kinda gross, kinda really strange, kind of uncomfortable. Luckily, it's only a story that comes from the question, what if? Number 10. Johnny becomes a living robot. We have talked about 1977's What If number 6. It's the one where the Fantastic Four have different powers. You know, where Reed becomes a brain and Ben Grimm gains dragon wings. That one. Sue Storm gets the most boring power, just taking on Reed Richards' stretching ability, but Johnny got a power that doesn't really make sense to me. Growing extra limbs or losing your body, minus your brain, and being human rubber doesn't really make sense either, but how the cosmic rays converted Johnny into a mechanical living robot with metal parts that calls himself Mandroid, I'll never know. Johnny is now forever a living robot and can control other forms of technology. He's also eternally a metal version of himself, which is honestly pretty good for a guy who loves his looks, because they'll never change. He's still a hothead though, so there's that. Number 9. WW2 Space Nick Fury. 1979's What If number 14 gives us a very different approach to history. Instead of World War II being fought in Europe, it is instead fought in space. In this alternate timeline, we discover interstellar travel much earlier in our history, and as such, the World War II we fight is more like Space Sector War, between Sector Alpha and Sector Beta in space. Don't ask me to define where those sectors are, I cannot. As this is still set at the same general time as regular WW2, some of these same characters are going to be involved, including the original Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos, new high-tech weaponry, fishbowl helmets, and aliens. It's a good bit of fun. We learn in the story that Admiral Von Strucker is actually working with the alien Axis powers to create a master race. So it seems we can master interstellar travel, but we still can't just accept each other's differences yet. Who put some reality in my comic book? Number 8. Thor, Herald of Galactus. Yes, the terrifying thought of someone as powerful as Thor becoming the Herald of Galactus is a strange thought, if only because it's so troubling. In this what if, Thor beats the ever-living heck out of the female Silver Surfer, who is the Herald of Galactus as he attacks Asgard, after she mortally wounds Sif. Seeing just how powerful Thor and his hammer are, Galactus stops the fight and offers Thor a place as his herald. Now, Thor initially says no, as we'd expect, and goes to keep fighting Galactus, but when the big purple dude points out that Asgard is in pretty bad shape, Thor takes one look, drops his hammer, and accepts. Just like that. Now, Thor makes a pretty awesome looking herald, even in the odd style of the comic, choosing the most fearsome and brutal worlds to feed to the World Eater, and sparing the weaker innocent worlds, again, as we'd expect. When Thor hears of Asgard being ruled over by Loki though, who de-lifed Odin and left Asgard in ruins, he takes some time from heralding to deal with his brother. Rediscovering his hammer and wielding it alongside the power cosmic, Thor becomes extremely powerful. Freeing his imprisoned friends and giving up Asgard for Galactus to feast upon, he destroys Loki and his frost giants and remains as the Herald of Galactus, saving innocent worlds from his destruction. Awesome. Number 7. Civil War Captain America. Honestly, I'm kind of a fan of this what if story, but it does have some strange moments and twists on characters you might not expect. For example, the story starts out with our Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes time displaced to the Civil War era. Bucky is the commander of the regiment and he is not a good guy. Apart from being an unhealthy amount of racist, he has quite the lack of moral compass. Our Steve obviously starts out as his scrawny and less than impressive self, but with a heart that shines through as strong and good. After sustaining injuries from not following his commander's orders, he is recovering in a nearby Union camp tended to by a Private Wilson, taken in by the Shawnee at a young age. Sensing the goodness in his heart, Wilson bestows a kind of eagle animal spirit on Mr. Rogers that makes you on the outside whatever you are on the inside. And this happens just as Barnes stumbles upon their location. The power of the ritual blasts Barnes away, and when we see his face, he has become the White Skull, which, I mean, you could just call him Skull, because skulls are white, you know, but whatever. And Steve has become a mystical super soldier, wielding a shield and sporting a headdress. He goes on to save presidents and leaves a lasting legacy of Captain and General Americas that continues all the way to the modern day. It's pretty sweet. Number 6. Spider-Man Punisher. On Earth 71928, or the What If Peter Parker Became the Punisher story, Peter's life remained pretty much the same as Earth 616 Peter. That is, until Uncle Ben's life was drawn to a close, and in response, Peter dispatched the robber who did the deed. In a very Punisher-like decision, Peter decided to deal with crime from this point on by any means necessary. Meaning, he started de-lifing criminals. Peter tried to avoid this at first, trying to go his normal route, but since criminals are criminals, and they always come back, and he knows how much easier of a solution it is to just take them out Punisher style, he went full force into that lifestyle. The easy solution, in my opinion, is not the heroic solution, but hey, that's how it goes. He carried the blam blam that took out Uncle Ben's life, as well as other weaponry and multiple different types of ammunition. His suit also took a skull logo instead of the traditional spider logo. Not because they want him to look like the Punisher, but due to the fact that the spider that gave him his powers was a noble false widow, which has a cephalothorax that looks like a skull. That's the reason. Not because the Punisher. Stop. Stop, he's not the Punisher, stop. Number 5. What if Ghost Rider was a baby? I know we keep pulling from this one, but that damn What If the Watcher was a stand-up comedian, What If comic, it's honestly the gift that just keeps on giving. There is a full page devoted to the question of what if the Ghost Rider had possessed someone else, someone other than Johnny Blaze. And of course, instead of finding some other able-bodied man or woman, a cigarette-smoking, leather vest-wearing Watcher shows us the spirit of vengeance inhabiting the body of an elderly woman in a wheelchair demanding warm milk, a rollerblade-wearing woman vowing to bring an end to disco, and an infant in a stroller. A big-headed goo-goo gaga who will hunt for vengeance after it finds someone to change its diaper. And just to make it 10 times better, this wee bab is wielding a cat, swinging around its head as it zooms around its Hellfire stroller. I can't make this up. I honestly can't. Number 4. Barbarian Hulk. Alright, this one requires a bit of unpacking. So, in issue 23 of What If, the Incredible Hulk has fallen in love with a woman named Jarella, a green-skinned queen from the subatomic world of Kai, who was brought back to our world when the Hulk was unshrunk. In regular continuity, she is laid to rest after sacrificing herself to save a boy from some rubble during a Hulk battle. But in this story, she lives, and the Hulk and Jarella are shrunk again so they can go and live happily ever after, on the subatomic level in the Kingdom of Kai. Now, Kai, for some reason, is very medieval / Roman / ancient in general, and Hulk, who now possesses his full intelligence, becomes king alongside Jarella. Soon, a dark plot by some dark gods and their dark minions rears its ugly head, and Hulk, alongside a group of other subatomic barbaric heroes, goes to thwart them, facing off against a second Savage Hulk that seems to have just been dispatched in like 2 comic panels. And that's where it ends. I'm assuming Hulk just stays subatomic and never returns to Earth, living as a microscopic barbarian for the rest of his life. Please check out this story. Number 3. Doom! Sorry. What would a good guy version of one of the strongest, most quotable, and most villainous villains in the pages of Marvel look like? Well, in issue 22 of What If, we get to see just that. When the Victor Von Doom of this universe discovers Reed Richards looking over his experiment notes, uninvited, he instead invites Reed to come help him out, which I think a true scientist would do. With Reed's help, he's able to contact his mother in the afterlife and learns of his royal blood. He trains in the advanced technology and mystical arts of an order of monks in Tibet and in the darkest places of sorcery, and is granted, instead of his classic armor, this really sweet golden armor evocative of knights. I think he looks pretty cool, but that's just me. He uses his knowledge to free his mother's soul from the realm of Mephisto, and uses his technology and sorcery to free his kingdom from an oppressive ruler. And all goes really well, until Mephisto comes back demanding the soul of his lover Valeria in exchange for the freedom of his people. Then he battles Mephisto once every year to try and save his love. It was almost a happy ending. Number 2. Spider Actor. A second Spider-Man what if on this list? Oh my. In this what if number 19, Peter Parker makes the simple decision of stopping the robber who would go on to take Uncle Ben's life. That simple act robs Peter of the lesson of the responsibility of having great power, and instead he turns to a life in the public eye. Now, as an actor, Peter turns his focus towards making films and protecting his reputation almost at any cost. He becomes the publicist for both the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, as well as Daredevil, all while still retaining his Spider-Man persona. He even gets a cool cape for a little bit. Well, it wasn't really that cool. When JJ exposes him to the public though, we see a bit more of an edge to this Spider-Man, when he threatens him and eventually ends his career, which comes back to bite him when Jonah forms the Sinister Six, including himself. It is only after Daredevil jumps in to save Peter and fight the villains that Peter does actually learn that old power and responsibility thing. But man, Peter's a bit of a snob this way, I don't like it. Number 1. Fantastic Four. In the very first What If comic, the question that is posed is pretty simple. What if, instead of rejecting Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four instead let Spider-Man join? Marvel's most popular family adopting Marvel's favorite hero? A match made in heaven. The Fantastic Five go on to fight crime and supervillains. That is, until the battle with Namor the Submariner. In this alternate reality, at the end of this battle, Sue Storm feels kind of cast to the wayside, with more focus being put upon Peter and the other members of the team, and she leaves with Namor and becomes his bride. It completely stops the marriage of Reed and Sue from ever happening, which is just a weird, unnatural world to see. We don't like it. But life goes on, and the new Fantastic Four featuring Spider-Man go on with their lives. But now we don't get a Franklin or Valeria Richards, and I mean, they're pretty important now, so I don't know, let me know in the comments what other fallout you think would happen with Sue Storm being replaced by Spider-Man on the Fantastic Four. It's seriously an interesting question.